We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot, season number 4, episode number 63. And man, good week to all of y'all, man. Good week as we mosey along in the sport landscape towards the end of the month of June. Man, this month has flown by. As we have a holiday coming up next Friday, man, that just let me know that this June month has flown by. We're definitely officially into summertime, man. It's just burning hot across the whole country right about now. You know, definitely on my end, you know, down in the southeast, we've cracked the 100 mark as far as the heat. So it's definitely on one, man, as far as the heat is concerned. First and foremost, man, if you're your first time listening, we on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. We provide hot fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're an OG of the show, you know we appreciate the check-in, man. We appreciate the good look. As last time I checked in with you guys, man, it was on the eve of Game 7 of the NBA Finals. You know, we've seen some Game 7, some classic ones over the years, man. Last episode, man, I give you guys my big 5 Game 7s going into Game 7, the whole swag and what jumped off. And I thought we was going to have another classic this past Sunday, which in certain respects we did. Definitely both teams fought hard to the tilt. Try to get them an NBA championship for both organizations. It'll be their first NBA championship in the history of their franchises. And the Oklahoma City Thunder, all congratulations. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, Mark Daigneault, head coach, Chet Holmgren, just everybody, man. Just putting some respect on everybody's name over there in OKC, man. It's an epic season for them, winning 68 games. Had the MVP on their squad, also leading the league in scoring. Also 9 fully fresh minted NBA MVP. As SGA is hit, he's hit a new zenith. And before everybody was coming with them young stats and everything, man, once he was able to win a championship and get that MVP award, I already knew he was in rare air. Just from the standpoint of, I've only seen a couple guys, just in my 40 plus years of watching the NBA, be able to accomplish the scoring title, MVP, and NBA Finals MVP all in the same season. You got to go back 25 years for that. Young Shaquille O'Neal in the Los Angeles Lakers. We also got Wilt Chamberlain on that list. We got Kareem on that list. And we got MJ on that list. Actually doing it 4 times, people, all in the 90s, man. I just let you know with just airspace what Mr. Air Jordan was on back in the 90s. But this Oklahoma City team, man, there's a lot of questions about, is this an all-time great team? Them being pushed by the Indiana Pacers, going 7 games, man, in the NBA Finals. And we going to get into that. We definitely going to get into that. I'm going to break that whole thing down, man, for what I saw in Game 7. And, we can't mention Game 7, man, without mentioning, definitely the injury to Tyrese Halliburton, suffering the Achilles injury, man, in Game 7. We all knew what it was when he went down. I know me from personal experience having to blow out, my ACL, my left Achilles, such as, Tyrese Halliburton, man. And it's just a long road back. And, that was the risk going in, him playing in Game 7. He was phenomenal in Game 6. He looked, better than we all would think he would look in Game number 6. In Game number 7, I mean, you got to put it all on the table, man. You got to put it all the way out there. And, if you ask me, just from a person that's personally went through this injury, hooping, very similar circumstances. And it's the shock, first and foremost. It's the shock because as a player, as an athlete, you know what time it is. You know what it is. You know what injury you have. I knew it existed when it happened to me. I knew what time it was. But it's really just the, once the adrenaline go down a little bit and just the magnitude of the situation, as we all saw, he was, definitely, crying, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. I can't blame a man for crying in that situation. I mean, he had an opportunity to win Game 7, win the franchise, their first NBA title, definitely playing the Rocky mode. This would have been one of the most improbable NBA champions of all time. Me watching this NBA sport and the NBA Finals since, the mid-1980s when it still was called the championship series instead of the NBA Finals. I haven't seen a team like this. Now, my OGs, we go back. We keep it new school and old school on here, man, on the spot. A little bit before my time, I was born, but a little bit before I started watching the NBA, you had a Houston Rockets team, man, back in 81, get to the NBA Finals at what they was like 500. Lost to the, the eventual NBA champions Boston Celtics, Larry Bird first NBA championship. And so we've seen teams with worse records get to the NBA Finals. We've seen an 8th seed in a strike-shortened season with the New York Knicks get to the NBA Finals, back in, 99? So we've seen, teams, get it out the mud. You had the Miami Heat a couple years ago, go from the play-in all the way to the NBA Finals. But not like this. All those teams that I've just mentioned, all of them had a bona fide, what you consider superstar, whether it be Moses Malone for the Houston Rockets back then, whether it be, Jimmy Butler, for the Miami Heat, putting the team, cape on his back. We had seen Jimmy do that before. But this team, at some point, during the regular season, this is a ball club that was, 5 games under 500. And for them to turn it around, they got the right infrastructure, with head coach. I just think that Rick Carlisle, he did an outstanding job this year. And, he made some mistakes, but, you're going to deep playoff runs. You're going to have some coaching mistakes. It's inevitable. I've never seen a coach bat 1,000 in the playoffs. That's just kind of just the mere, how the game is played. But, to them and to the Indiana fans, man, congratulations. You guys had a phenomenal season. You definitely brought, basketball to, what we call the core Midwest. That whole swag. And even though the ratings was down in the NBA Finals, we all knew that what time that was. Ratings overall, in any sport is a tough thing. Outside of the National Football League, they own ratings. You play basically, you got the Sunday lockdown. Most people who offer work on Sunday, you got that lockdown. Then, I'm going to hit you with some sauce, on that Thursday. Because everybody geeked up before the weekend. So we got Thursday night football for you. Then we got Black Fridays, and I ain't even get into Monday Night Football. So NFL got ratings on lock as far as the sport is concerned. This is going to be a long time coming before they get knocked off that throne. And so I knew the ratings was going to be down in the NBA, for the NBA Finals. But once again, congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder. It's just well deserved. I'm going to speak my piece a little bit on the series, kind of what I see potentially for both teams, going into the next season a little bit. Just going to add a little sauce on that. So we definitely going to get into that. Also, speaking of, man, you already know we on the night of the NBA draft. Primetime edition. First round tonight. Second round will be tomorrow. This 2025 NBA draft class, there's been a lot of speculation about it. You got Cooper Flagg sitting at the top. He's going to the Dallas Mavericks. That's inevitable. But after that, I don't know. And there's some great prospects in this draft. And I'm not saying it because, I think it's not a strong draft, because I think this draft is much stronger than last year's draft. This draft is much stronger. Now, I'm definitely going to say that off the rip. Whether you got Cooper Flagg, you got Dylan Harper, son of the former NBA player Ron Harper, of course. Did a great job at Rutgers, even though the team didn't make it to the NCAA tournament. He was hooping. And, he was, a McDonald's All-American, so we already seen that. Another McDonald's All-American on the same team is Mr. Ace Bailey, who's been in the big-time news over the last, say, week or so going into this draft, not working out, not sitting down, chopping it up with teams. And I had an opportunity, as guys may know, listen to the last episode. I've been watching Ace Bailey hoop since he was 16. Down here, the neck of the woods that I'm presently at down outside of Atlanta. And for me, it's a nice little deep draft. You got Con Knippel, from Duke, teammate of Cooper Flagg. You got E.J. Edgecombe from Baylor. Got the opportunity to watch him play a couple times during this season. Outstanding talent. Very, very athletic. 6'4", 6'5" guy. You got him, a little sprinkle of a little bit of a D Wade in him. I got to see, if he got that, that dog in him, man. But the athleticism and the shiftiness, and he's probably the best, perimeter athlete in this draft, hands down. So there's a lot cooking in this NBA draft. It's a lot cooking. Can't forget about, another younger that I've been watching playing, since he was, a young lad. And that's Jeremiah Fears, man, from my hometown, Chicago, man. Went down to Joliet down there for a second. What y'all know about it, man, back in the home state of Illinois. Him and his brothers was putting in work on the high school tip. Went to Oklahoma, man, and made it do what it do. Looks like he's going to be a top 10 pick tonight. But, as I mentioned, man, the talk of the draft is Mr. Ace Bailey going into this draft. Him just not working out, not talking to teams. And it's funny because, a lot of people was talking about his representation and who his agent is and all of that. And I didn't even notice until roughly about 3 days ago that Sharif Cooper, formerly of University of Auburn, straight down from the A. I watched in high school as well. Didn't know his pops happened to be Ace Bailey's agent. And I'm not sure. And I'm not trying to put no stain on, on fam. But he's what I'm probably going to consider a new agent out here. And with a new agent, you don't have what I consider the cachet to try to pull that move. Now, NBA teams, if the talent's there, they're going to draft you. I mean, that's just what it is. Let's not front on that. Now, is he going to slide? I believe a little bit. I still think he's going to be within the top 6 without question. I don't think he's falling no further than 6. But, I just think that was a move that I wouldn't say I would have did the same thing, at least from a standpoint of talking and having a conversation with these teams. I mean, they putting a big time investment in each player. You got to sit down and at least chop game up with them a little bit. So we'll definitely get into the NBA draft, man. Also, too, man, got to put some, love on the home team. My Chicago Bulls got the 12th overall pick. We'll see what it do. I got a little draft suggestion of who we should go with, man. See if it come true. I'm going to hit y'all up with that in the next segment. And finally, before we transition, news across the National Football League, man. Aaron Rodgers made his, what we call, ceremonial appearance on the Pat McAfee show. Said that this is probably going to be his final season in the National Football League. And a lot of people have been raining on Aaron Rodgers, just saying that, oh, here we go again, diva, man. Now, I've been out there to say that, yeah, this guy's a diva. That's obvious. I mean, what more evidence do we need? Now, that's not to take away from the football player that this guy is. I mean, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer. Could have won more Super Bowls, but he at least got one in the game. So, even though I've had my differences per se with Aaron Rodgers as far as on the diva mode, for him to come out and say this is poignant for me from a standpoint of, I think he's tired of playing the game, at least from a standpoint, and I'm not talking about the game on the field, I'm just talking about the diva game. He recently just got married, congratulations to him on that. But I'm glad that he put it out there that, hey, this could be it from a standpoint of you don't want to, bring him into the fold and then in week 6 he come out like, yeah, this is my last run type move. So, I think that you get out in front of it really before the season kickoff. And fans who love football, people who love good quarterback play can sit back and appreciate Aaron Rodgers and his last run in the National Football League, one of the classiest organizations across the National Football League and across all sports is Pittsburgh Steelers. So at least, he's able to kind of go out with a class organization. We'll see what they do on the season. That's a whole nother conversation. But, definitely, I couldn't be mad at Aaron Rodgers for coming out, man, just saying that, hey, this is probably my last run in this whole little thing, man. So we'll see what it do. So coming up, man, I'm going to get into the NBA Finals, recap that, man, put a bow on that, man, as Oklahoma City Thunder won their first NBA championship, man, in Oklahoma City as the Thunder. And we got the NBA draft jumping off tonight. I'm going to get into a little bit of that as well, coming up in the next forte of the show. Once again, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. Welcome back. And as we discussed a little earlier, man, the NBA Finals just concluded. So we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, King of the Hill, officially NBA champions 2025. Congratulations once again to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, winning the NBA Finals MVP. won the regular season MVP as well as the scoring championship. And now he's in rare air. And the big time question for the Oklahoma City Thunder, man, is this team on their way to a dynasty? And for me, whenever NBA team wins a championship, I sit back, man, next day. So sit back just to look at the dichotomy of the team and just to see if this team is one, obviously, an old team. Is it a young team? Is it a mixture of veterans and young players? And Oklahoma City Thunder, they're a young organization from the top down. You brought in Alex Caruso. He the OG, he the uncle of the team, but he's still playing at a high level, as you saw what he did in these NBA finals. And so the obvious question would be yes. That'll be the obvious answer to the question. Would be easily yes. But what's transpired over the last 24 hours, man, in Boston with the Boston Celtics, as you know, they was the reigning NBA champions coming in, and there's a lot of people felt at the beginning of the year that they was on their way to repeat. Me being one of them, I had Denver and Boston in the NBA finals. And it was all good just a week ago, as Jay-Z would say. Because this team, with a sudden injury to Jason Tatum, has theoretically kind of tore down what won them an NBA championship. And we'll start with Drew Holiday. As Drew Holiday, he was shipped out, got moved on to the Portland Trail Blazers. They bring in Anthony Simons. And for Boston, it was a cost-cut move. You got to, pay big-time money, man, for these guys now, man. You got rotational guys getting $30 million a pop. $30 million a pop. I remember when Jordan got $30 million in the 90s, people was tweaking out. Now you a guy average 6-7 points a game, man, get the 30 piece. So I'm not knocking players for getting their bread. Don't get it twisted. Get that money if it's out there. Obviously, it's a big-time business, a $1 billion industry. You got to break bread. It's revenue sharing. So the money gonna trickle down to the players in some, form. So now get your money. But we've seen the ramifications of teams now that's into the luxury tax, teams that's into the second apron. And for those who all don't quite, understand what the second apron is, man, I'll break it down to you, man, real simplistically. Luxury tax, there was implications back in the day. Golden State Warriors is the team that come to mind. Joe Lacob, the owner, had a big-time luxury tax bill due to the fact that back then, before they made some changes, it was dollar for dollar, meaning that you $40 million into the luxury tax, you got to cut a check for the same bread. So now it's 1.5, meaning that whatever your luxury tax bill is, it's times 1.5 that you got to cut a check for. And so organizations and teams and these owners, if they feel that their team not going to win an NBA championship or not a big-time contender, yeah, they're going to cut costs. And Boston is the prime example of that. And probably the most notable example of that in this era of, the salary cap and just the implications of, going into the luxury tax. And for them, losing, Holiday is a big-time move. I think that, for me, I'm not going to say that he's washed, but he's definitely on the back end of his career. Outstanding two-way player, helped the Bucks win a championship, won a chip in Boston. Definitely salute to Drew Holiday. And with Portland, they just extended Chauncey Billups. Everybody who hoop fans, man, they, really get out with Chauncey, man, Mr. Big Shot. I was happy for him to get, extended out there in Portland, but I'm not sure what direction this team is going to go in. So we'll see with Simons coming back for the Boston Celtics. I think it's a good move for Boston from the standpoint of if you didn't want to really play Drew Holiday the money, Simons obviously he in the final year of his deal. He could be moved actually tonight is what I'm hearing. He's still out there in these streets, as far as Boston, still being in a position to make some ancillary moves. But I like Simons. He averaged basically a dub out in Portland. It wasn't a winning situation, but the guy can shoot and he can score. That's what Boston kind of needs, especially with Tatum being out, all of next season pretty much. And so now they move on from Porzingis, ship him down, hit a Hotlanta with the Hawks 3-team deal. Nets got involved in that deal, got a piece of the action in that deal. And so teams are now pivoting. And so to circle back to what I was saying about the Oklahoma City Thunder as far as it's an easy answer to the question, yes. This thing changed on a dime. If you'd have told anybody, 10 months ago that Boston would be on this move right here and all this would have happened, most of us wouldn't have believed it. No way. And so now, word on the street is that Jaylen Brown could potentially be available. Teams are definitely hitting up Boston trying to see what it do on Jaylen Brown. Also, too, Derek White trying to see what it do with him, too. So Boston couldn't be done. They still out here working. So, from Oklahoma City's perspective, Sam Presti, and shout out to him, I've been hard on Sam Presti from a standpoint of, not that I don't think he's a capable general manager, because this man is just drafting MVPs like it's going out of business. So I definitely got to put some respect on his name without question. But, yeah, you got to win one of these things, man. You got to win one of these things, and every fan base in the NBA is different. In Oklahoma City, you can kind of pull, hey, we're going to rebuild and tear this thing all the way down to the studs. Give us about a good 3-4 years, we'll be back around the block. Can't do that in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. Fans are going to be on one. And so there's a lot of movement across the NBA. There's been a lot of moves. You can't forget about, the New Orleans Pelicans, freshly minted GM down there, Joe Dumars, making that move, sending out CJ McCollum, bringing in the infamous Jordan Poole. Welcome to New Orleans. We'll see how that experiment works itself out. But it was a cost-cutting move. The Washington Wizards, they're in a situation where they basically trying to tear the whole thing down. If you got an expiring contract, man, you got Washington on line one. They definitely listening. So, I thought that was an interesting deal. I had said it also, too, for those who, it's first time listening. I think the New Orleans Pelicans should move on from Zion Williamson. I think it's time to go ahead and end that relationship and see what you can get back, because right now the value for him is going to be topsy-turvy on that. So you got to be able to kind of explore, what's out there and what his trade value is. And if you Joe Dumars, who, he's won an NBA championship as a GM before, out there in Detroit, that could be in the cards. So we don't know, man. These next week or so could get very interesting. And I know there's one big time trade that I ain't mentioned. The trade that jumped it all off, man, over these last 72 hours, man, was the huge deal, man, with the Phoenix Suns trading Kevin Durant down to Houston. And Houston shipping out Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks. Kevin Durant, it's been a lot of, talk about Kevin Durant ever since his stint in Golden State, winning 2 championships, leaving, going to Brooklyn. That didn't work out. Then, moving on to Phoenix, and now he in a whole nother situation in Houston. And, KD, he ain't a spring chicken, but he's still hooping and still efficient and a walking bucket. Walking bucket. I mean, easy money sniper, 27 a pop. Now, for me, this is a situation for the Houston Rockets. They got great leadership. They just extended Ime Udoka. And so I'm liking what I'm seeing down there in Houston. A lot of people thought that Houston didn't give up much, and I disagree with that. And here's why. Houston just had a lot of assets. They just had a lot of assets. Sometimes when you're an organization and you got a lot of young assets and draft capital, you really don't have to give up the whole farm. I mean, they got 2 starters back. Jalen Green, 23 years old. There's still hope out there for Jalen Green. He had a bad playoff series. I mean, he's a young player. This is really his first deep playoff run. What they say, skid happens, man. So he could be a guy that could still be a guy. So, you get that back in return. You get Dylan Brooks, who's a guy that, is the villain of the league. He definitely going to give your team, a little extra grit and grind, which is something that Phoenix needs badly. Then you got 5 second-round picks, which to me, you can go in, including the 10th pick tonight, coming up in a few. So I think they got a lot back. So it's really about, for Phoenix, I put it out there, man, on Facebook. Don't forget to check your boy out on Facebook, too, at We On Fire Sports. We On Fire Sports Podcast, by the way. But, I think it's time for Phoenix to rebuild. I think that if you Devin Booker, you the Phoenix Suns, it's just like, okay, tonight is the night. What you got? Definitely hit my phone. Not saying that I don't believe in Devin Booker. I'm not saying that I'm going to give him up for the free ski. But at the end of the day, you're a team like Phoenix. You're in a competitive conference like the Western Conference. Ain't no telling when next time you're going to be a relevant team. We've already seen when Devin Booker was just the front man with a team with limited talent. They're not going nowhere. You bring in additional talent. They still weren't going nowhere. And that's nothing disrespectful about Devin Booker, man. This man got to the NBA Finals, 3 years ago. So, I just think that, for them and a lot of teams across the league tonight, it's going to be a lot of movement. Definitely, as I mentioned, we got that NBA draft jumping off in a few minutes. And my Bulls got the 12th pick. My Bulls, man, just put a little sauce on my Bulls. I'm very disappointed with the front office of the Chicago Bulls. We got, Arturas Karnisovas, general manager of the Chicago Bulls, assistant general manager Mark Eversley. Yeah, I'm putting their name out there because I think it was time for the Bulls to transition off these guys. They've been in the organization for 5 years. We just basically been a 38-win team. We got, pieces on our team. We made a trade, obviously, with Alex Caruso, bringing in Josh Giddey. Caruso just, made a victory lap at the parade. Giddey's a guy that the Bulls got to think about, hey, you got to re-sign this guy. He's up for a deal. So with the 12th pick tonight, I think that if the Bulls keep the pick, I think they definitely got to go front court, man. For me, as a young man that I've seen and actually got an opportunity to watch him play in person, man, Azanul from the University of Georgia, man, power forward, about 6'10", left hand, creative from around the basket, definitely can catch some lobs. Definitely need to go young in the front court for the Chicago Bulls. So I think that's the direction, and I think my Bulls should go to tonight, unless you want to make a deal, which word on the street was the Bulls had a deal on the table for Kobe White down to Orlando before Desmond Bane, in the Memphis Grizzlies, made that move. So, I just think that tonight's going to be an interesting night. I can't wait. It's one of the most exciting, nights, for all these young men, man, that's going to cross over into the NBA. Definitely me just watching the draft as a kid, going back, watching some of the greatest players who ever played this sport be drafted. One of them come to mind is my man Shaquille O'Neal, getting drafted in 92. Already knew big fella was going to rock out. We seen Allen Iverson in 96 coming in, just putting it in, scoring 40s with the baby fro before he had the braids, putting in work. So, I've seen guys, man, come through this draft. I mean, there's so many that I can name. We can go on and on, man, but I just think that it's an important day for most teams across the league because I think the landscape is now a little bit more balanced. There's no dominant team per se out there. And so we'll see what it do, man. But coming up, we're just going to put a bow on this thing, man, as we transition, man, through midweek. As I mentioned, we got the NBA draft tonight. Puts a bow on the NBA season. Obviously, got Summer League coming up, man. And, just on our end and on our tip, we're going to wrap up the season, man. After the NBA draft, after the dust settled, just a little bit of that, man, right before the holiday, man, we're going to have that grand finale jumping off, man, for season number 4. But coming up, man, we're going to put a bow on this thing, man, as we mosey on through midweek. Of course, I'll be back with you guys, man, at the end of the week, but definitely check game. First and foremost, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you in We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. Yeah, man, don't forget to check us out, man, where all podcasts can be listened to, man, especially on Podbean, man. We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. Also, too, on Twitter at We on Fire Sports. Also, too, on YouTube, We on Fire Sports Podcast. So we out here, man. So I appreciate, man, all the love, man, and all the check-in, man, and, you guys lending the ear. Definitely appreciate that. But before we get out of here, we got the NBA draft, man. We're right on the verge of the NBA draft in a few moments. And to me, man, it's an interesting thing. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I was talking about the Boston Celtics. A lot of talk, about them potentially moving on from Derek White as well as my man J to the B, Jaylen Brown. I just think that tonight, I got a feeling, man, that I just got an itch. I think that Derek White might be moved tonight. Now, I'm not sure, as far as, Boston is what they may get back in the deal, but I definitely think that that's a deal as we speak right now, man. I think Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics trying to put a move, man, and try to see what they can get for Derek White, get a young player back potentially, man, that's, at definitely a lower price point. And so that's what I feel about that as well. I think there's going to be a couple other teams that try to move up in the draft. Also, a team that I got my eye on, man, is really the San Antonio Spurs. I mean, they got the second pick. I think they got 14th or something like that overall, if I'm not mistaken. So they could be in a situation where, one, they can get Dylan Harper or, Edgecombe. I think both those guys would be good suited. I just think that with Harper, it's going to be interesting because you got Stephon Castle down there, the reigning rookie of the year. Then you also, too, have a situation where you got De'Aaron Fox. And now you also have, Wemby, who should be able to bounce back from the blood clots, hopefully, be able to start the beginning of the regular season. Is that I think that they're going to try to go big in this draft. I think that my man from Duke, Malika, I think that he's in a situation where I think that wouldn't be a bad ad, for the San Antonio Spurs. But I think they got to move up from 14 to be able to grab him. I think he'll be off the board by then. Also another question going in, how far I think that Ace Bailey going to slip. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I think he's going to still be a top 6 guy. I think that he definitely, by not working out for teams, cost himself the potential to be the second overall pick in this draft because I think he has the talent to do so. And so, for me, that's interesting. Also, another interesting tidbit about Ace Bailey, which, as I mentioned to you guys, I had an opportunity to watch him play in person, man. He from, around the neck of the woods, man, where the podcast is being produced at. And so I had the opportunity over the last couple of years to watch him play when he was in high school. And, I didn't think that he was as tall as 6'10". I thought he was more so about a solid 6'9". But, what I'm hearing, he really is 6'7". Now, do I think that affected his game? I think that he's more of a, he was more of a face-up guy anyway. So I don't think it's going to hurt his game, to a huge standpoint. I mean, the talent is there, but I do think he cost himself at least being a second pick in the draft. So we'll see. He might have a promise out there from a team, and that's why he's just playing coy right now. It could be on our face. We'll see in a few moments. Also, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, and I'll circle back on, man, I got to see what my Chicago Bulls going to do. What we got going on, man. It's just, teams around the league making moves and hustle side moves, and we just staying content. So it's a big-time question mark what the Bulls going to do. I'll definitely be locked in to my Bullies tonight. Also, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, Boston, just the whole situation with them trying to tear it down or rebuild it back up. It's going to be interesting if they make some more moves tonight. We'll see. Another team I'm looking forward to as well, man, is the Denver Nuggets. They got, new guys up there in the front office out there. Moved on from Calvin Booth, and, they hired 2 GMs, matter of fact. So it's going to be interesting what they do tonight to try to build around Nikola Jokic because the Western Conference is on one right now. So we'll see what it do. Also, got to put some respect, on the Indiana Pacers, a team that got to, the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals and literally a half away from winning an NBA championship. What they going to do with Tyrese Halliburton being out? They got some free agents that they got to think about as well, such as Miles Turner. So there's going to be some exciting movement tonight. I'm just kind of looking at those teams and so forth. So we'll definitely see what it do, man. But first and foremost, man, I appreciate you guys checking in, man. We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot. Man, we'll be back towards the end of the week. I'll definitely recap the NBA draft and see what teams do, man. Might put some draft grades out there, man. See what direction some of these organizations are going to go. Also, too, man, we'll get into a little bit more across MLB, Major League Baseball, man, as we get into these hot days of summer. So, definitely, man, I appreciate you guys checking out, man. We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot.